So the number one question that I believe we have received so far about the tiny house since we started posting about it on Life Inside a Box here is, why build a tiny house on a trailer when you could just buy an RV? That is a totally valid and sensible question. There are pros and cons to living in a tiny house, as well as there's pros and cons to living in an RV. And it really just kind of comes down to the lifestyle that you want to live and what you're going to be doing with the tiny house or what you're going to be doing with the RV. And I think the reason why a lot of people were questioning why we wanted to build a tiny house as opposed to going with an RV is because we do want to move around with a tiny house a little bit. We're not going to be moving it like 8 or 9 times per year. It might be like once or twice per year we actually move the location of it. Coming from that perspective, it'll make a little bit more sense why we want to live in a tiny house as opposed to an RV. Tiny houses feel much more like an actual home as opposed to living in an RV or a camper. The inside of the tiny house will look essentially like a home, but it'll just be quite a bit smaller than your standard house. It's actually gonna feel like a house or like a home as opposed to feeling like you're living in a camper or an RV. And one of the main pros of living in a tiny house that's on a trailer is that you can move it from one place to another pretty easily. It's not as easy as moving an RV because a tiny house is going to weigh a considerable amount more than an RV. That's just due to the entire construction process. A tiny house is going to be using a lot more wood, and therefore it's just going to be typically a lot heavier with the style of framing that's going to be done with it. One of the great things about building your own tiny house or having one built for you is that you can really get it built to match your lifestyle. So you can really customize it. You can put things here, you can put things there, you can have windows here, windows there, chairs here, chairs there. But typically with an RV, you have like a set plan where everything already is when you buy it. It's like the table's gotta be here, the chair's gotta be here, this has gotta be here. Whereas like in a tiny house that you're building yourself, you have much more freedom to kind of like create this home on the inside that is truly a representation of the type of lifestyle that you have. So the tiny house that Hannah and I are building is gonna very much complement our lifestyle, and that is gonna be intertwined into the design of it. So another really nice thing about living in a tiny house on a trailer is that you get to decide the types of materials that are actually being used in the construction of it. RVs are typically constructed with very toxic materials, so there's a lot of off-gassing from the materials that are used in the construction of it. So you're living in this environment full time that is not necessarily the best for your health. So kind of going along with the material choice is that the interior and the actual construction of the house is going to be of a much higher quality than that of an RV. And with using lower quality components and materials, you're going to experience things breaking down a lot more often, and then you have to go fix those. But in a tiny house, you can build things so that they're basically to a much higher quality. Now another thing, this can kind of go either way with a tiny house or with an RV. Tiny houses are typically built, depending on the length and the size, anywhere from about $10,000 all the way up to probably $25,000 or $30,000. And that's for the people who choose to do it themselves. If you have a company build it, it can be, $40,000, $50,000 pretty easily. RVs though can range in price from something that's, you get it for a couple $1,000s off Craigslist, all the way up into the 6-figure range. Like those motorized, like long RVs, a lot of them can cost more than an actual house costs. Some of them can get up well over six figures. It's crazy how expensive some of them are. So I'm just gonna go over a few cons of a tiny house on a trailer. So a tiny house on a trailer is gonna weigh a considerable amount more than an RV. RVs are designed much more aerodynamically, so you're gonna get better gas mileage, and it's gonna be easier to move that RV down the highway as opposed to a tiny house on wheels. A tiny house on wheels is not the easiest thing to find a place to park it, but that's not something that's really of too much concern. Hannah and I will find like the most perfect places to park our tiny house, so I'm really stoked for that. Another thing to consider is that an RV is not really designed to be where you're gonna do the majority of your living. So full-time living, it's not really designed for that. RVs are not insulated very well, so it costs more to heat or it costs more to cool, whereas like in our tiny house, we're gonna have like spray foam insulation. So it's gonna be much more efficient with heating and cooling. So the tiny house on wheels is gonna be much more effective for full-time living as opposed to living in an RV. This all comes down to, what is gonna be the best for the individual. For us, we don't really desire to live in an RV. Lots of people do, but it's not really something that we want to do. We love the idea of minimalistic and simple living, and to actually take that concept and to put it into a house, I think is totally awesome. It's been such a strong dream and passion of mine ever since I watched the movie Tiny. I think it's probably about 2 years ago that I watched it the first time. I just always loved this idea of building my own house. And when I first started talking to Hannah, I told her the idea about living in a tiny house on a trailer. And at first she thought it was totally stupid. But over time she's really seen the benefit of it. And this is something that we really get to do together. We get to work on it together and live in it together. It's gonna be a much more enriching experience. It's gonna be so much more fun. We're gonna learn a lot. We're gonna grow a lot as people through the actual building process. I'm just really excited to see, the outcome, and I'm just really stoked to do it. So I've never ever thought about living in an RV, but living in a tiny house, that is something that just clicks in my mind and it makes so much sense. And it's something that I really want to do. I really want to build it, and I really want to show it on YouTube how this whole process goes together. So that's why we're building a tiny house as opposed to living in an RV. Obviously with any living situation there's some pros and some cons, but I think the pros by far outweigh the cons in this situation. Alright, I'm gonna head down to Chipotle because yesterday was Easter Sunday and of course they were closed. So I'm gonna go down there tonight for an awesome burrito bowl. Ain't that right, Dewey? He's got to go potty. All right, these guys, they had their dinner. You guys had your dinner? Was it good? Yeah, they say it was.
That's so good. I definitely think Chipotle is one of the best fast food vegan options out there. It just hits the spot. There's something about Mexican food, it's just so good. Alright, I'm gonna head on home. Gonna call this the end of today's vlog. So hope you enjoyed the video talking about tiny houses versus RVs, and I hope that answers all of your questions. Catch you guys on the next vlog. Talk to you soon. Peace.